the Duke of Ashford, did not look at his bride as she walked down the aisle. Alara Vance felt the weight of every step, the rustle of ivory silk the only sound besides the muted whispers of 200 guests. Her fingers trembled around the stems of white roses, and her heart beat so hard she could scarcely breathe. She had dreamed of this moment since she was 12 years old, but the man waiting at the altar never once turned his head. When she reached his side, she lifted her veil with steady hands she did not know she possessed. Alexander Ashford, the Duke of Ashford, stood like carved marble. His dark hair was swept back, his jaw tight, his gray eyes fixed somewhere above her shoulder. He was more handsome than the faded memory she had carried for 10 years, and infinitely colder. The minister spoke, and Alexander recited his vows in a voice completely empty of warmth. When he slid the ring onto her finger, his touch was brief and impersonal, as though she were a stranger in a crowd. And she realized, with a pain that stole her breath, that to him she was exactly that. The carriage ride to Ashford Park was silent. He sat across from her, his profile illuminated by the passing street lamps, his gaze lost in the darkness beyond the window. She stole a glance at the silver watch chain hanging from his waistcoat. There, knotted carefully among the links, was a length of faded blue ribbon, her ribbon, the one she had pulled from her own hair and pressed into his palm when they were children. He still carried it. The sight of it made her chest constrict with a terrible, fragile hope. Later that night, in the grand corridors of Ashford Park, he finally spoke to her directly. His voice was as cold as winter stone. "This marriage was a matter of duty. My family required an alliance, and your father's debts made you available. I will give you my name, my protection, and every material comfort. But I will never give you my heart. It belongs to someone I lost a long time ago." Alara stood in her wedding gown, the candlelight flickering over the delicate lace, and felt the hope inside her wither and die. She opened her mouth to say, "I am that girl. I am Ellie." But he was already walking away, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving her alone. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the window, clutching the tiny silver locket hidden beneath her nightdress, and let the tears fall silently. In the locket was a miniature portrait of a woman she now knew to be his mother. He had given it to her 10 summers ago, pressing it into her hand with a boy's solemn promise. "This is so you never forget me. I will find you, Ellie. I will marry you." She had never forgotten, but clearly he had. 10 years earlier, Alara Vance was not the daughter of a baron drowning in debt. She was simply a steward's child, quiet and bookish, with wild brown hair and too many freckles. Her father worked for the Earl of Lindmere, and during one golden summer, the Earl hosted the young heir to the Ashford dukedom. His name was Alexander, and he was 14 years old, already carrying the shadow of his future title. He was lonely and proud, and he found an unexpected friend in the steward's 12-year-old daughter. She had been too embarrassed to give him her real name. Her father's position was humble, and she feared he would not wish to associate with her. So when he asked, she blurted out her middle name, Ellie. He called her Ellie from that moment on, and the name became a secret treasure between them. They spent every possible hour together that summer. He taught her to skip stones across the lake. She read poetry to him under the old willow tree. He stole tarts from the kitchen and shared them with her in the stables. He told her about his cold, demanding mother and the weight of the title he would one day inherit. She told him about her dreams of traveling far beyond the estate. On the last day of summer, he gave her the silver locket with his mother's portrait inside, and she pulled the blue ribbon from her hair and tied it around his wrist. "When I am Duke, I will come back for you," he said fiercely. "I promise, I will marry you, Ellie." She believed him with all her heart. 2 weeks later, her father was dismissed abruptly. The family packed and left within a day. She never learned the reason. She wrote letter after letter addressed to Alexander, future Duke of Ashford, pouring out her heart onto the page. She never received a single reply. Months turned into years. Her father's fortunes declined, and the Vance name faded into impoverished obscurity. She kept the locket hidden, and she kept the memory locked even deeper, a painful, beautiful ache that refused to heal. She never knew that the Dowager Duchess of Ashford, a woman of ruthless ambition, had intercepted every letter. She burned them in her fireplace, her expression cold, and instructed the footman to inform any messenger that the Vance family had disappeared without a trace. Her son would marry for power and status, not for a childish infatuation with a steward's daughter. She watched Alexander grow into a man who believed, with bitter certainty, that the girl he loved had abandoned him without a word. He kept the blue ribbon. He hated her for it, but he could not part with it. The first month of marriage was a quiet agony. Alara tried. She truly tried. She learned the household staff's names, memorized the schedules, and took over the management of the kitchens with a gentle efficiency that surprised the housekeeper. She dressed elegantly for dinner, choosing gowns of soft lavender and sage that brought out the warmth of her hazel eyes. She asked him about his day, his investments, the tenant disputes that consumed his mornings. His answers were always polite and brief. He never asked about hers. One evening, she found him in the library, standing before the fireplace with the blue ribbon cradled in his palm. He was staring at it with an expression of such raw, wounded longing that her heart twisted violently. She took a breath and stepped forward. "That ribbon," she said softly, "it must mean a great deal to you." His fingers closed over it instantly. His face shuddered. "It belonged to the only woman I ever loved, a girl I met when I was a boy. She vanished from my life without explanation. I have not seen her since." Alara's throat tightened. She could end it now. 3 words, "I am Ellie." But his eyes, when they met hers, were hard and guarded. He looked at her as if she were an intruder, an imposition. If she told him the truth now, would he even believe her? Or would he think she was a desperate schemer, trying to manipulate his deepest wound? "I am sorry," she whispered instead. "That must have been very painful." He said nothing. He simply walked past her, leaving the scent of leather and winter air in his wake. That night, Alara stood before her mirror and unpinned her hair. The girl in the reflection looked fragile and pale. She pressed a hand over the locket beneath her nightdress and made a quiet vow. If he could not see her, she would stop begging to be seen. She would find her own purpose. But before she could fully retreat, the Dowager Duchess arrived. Helena Ashford, the Duke's mother, was a woman carved from ice and silk. She swept into Ashford Park with a retinue of servants and a smile that never reached her eyes. At the first formal dinner, she seated herself at Alara's right hand and spent the entire meal offering barbed compliments. "How charming that you wear such simple gowns, my dear, so refreshingly unpretentious. Of course, the late Duchess always wore Parisian silks, but I am sure you have your own style." Alara smiled calmly. "Comfort is a luxury I was not always afforded, Your Grace. I have learned to appreciate it." The Dowager's eyes narrowed slightly. She had not expected a spine. Beside them, Alexander ate in silence, his attention fixed on his plate. The real blow came 3 weeks later, at the Ashford Spring Ball. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and jewels. Alara wore a gown of deep emerald, her hair swept up with pearls, and for the first time since the wedding she felt almost beautiful. Alexander stood beside her, receiving guests with the polished coldness she had come to expect. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she was steel, not glass. Then Lady Cecily Hertford arrived. Cecily was everything Alara was not. A diamond of the ton, with golden curls and a laugh like silver bells. She was a distant cousin of some minor earl, known for her charm and her ability to command attention. She swept into the ballroom in a gown of sapphire blue, and her eyes found the Duke immediately. Alara watched, a chill creeping down her spine as Cecily approached and curtsied deeply. Her voice was pitched to carry. "Your Grace, I have waited so long to see you again. I hoped you might remember me. After all, a summer by the lake is not so easily forgotten." Alexander went very still, his gray eyes sharpened. What did you say? Cecily tilted her head, her expression perfectly wistful. Linden Hall, the willow tree. I was only a child and far too shy to give you my true name. You called me Ellie. The world tilted. Alara's hand clenched around her champagne flute. No, it was impossible. This woman was lying. She had to be. But Cecily spoke with such easy, practiced nostalgia, and Alexander's face, his face was transforming. The cold mask cracked, and beneath it was an aching, desperate hope. You are Ellie. His voice was barely a whisper. Cecily's eyes glistened on cue. I am. My family changed our name after a terrible scandal. I never received any of your letters. I thought you had forgotten me. She touched the lace at her wrist, and Alara saw it. A faded blue ribbon looped around her glove. A replica. It must be. But Alexander's gaze dropped to it, and something inside him seemed to break open. He took Cecily's hand. I have waited 10 years to find you. And then he led her onto the dance floor. Alara stood motionless as the music began. She watched her husband waltz with another woman, his hand resting on her waist, his head bent close to hers. She watched the guests murmur and glance between the Duke and his abandoned wife. She heard the whispers, sharp as glass shards. The poor Duchess. He has not looked at her once all evening. Lady Cecily is his childhood sweetheart, I hear. How terribly romantic. What must the Duchess feel, standing there watching? She felt everything. Humiliation, hot and sickening, rose up her throat. But stronger than that was a grief so profound it hollowed her out. He believed a stranger over his own wife. He had chosen to believe because he wanted to. Because Cecily was beautiful and confident, and everything a duke's lost love should be. And Alara was nothing but the inconvenient woman who shared his name. She set down her glass, turned, and walked out of the ballroom. No one stopped her. In her chambers, she pulled the silver locket from her neck and held it so tightly the edges bit into her palm. She did not cry. Crying would mean she still had hope, and hope was a wound that would not stop bleeding. She sat in the dark for a long time, and when the door opened an hour later, it was Alexander. His cravat was loosened, his eyes still bright with the fervor of the evening. You left the ball early, he said. It was not a question. I was tired. His gaze flickered over her. If he noticed her red-rimmed eyes, he did not comment. Cecily will be staying at the estate for a few days. I want you to make her feel welcome. Alara looked at him then, this man who had sworn to marry her under a willow tree. You believe she is the girl you lost. He stiffened. She knew things only Ellie would know. The willow tree, the lake, the tarts from the kitchen, and she had the ribbon. Anyone could learn those things, Alara said quietly. Servants talk, stories spread. His expression closed. You know nothing about it. You have no right to speak of her. Her heart, which she had thought was already shattered, splintered a little further. I am your wife. A wife in name only. I made that clear. Cecily is the woman I loved, and I will not let your jealousy ruin the chance I have been given to finally find happiness. His voice was sharp, dismissive. He looked at her as though she were an obstacle, a troublesome piece of furniture in his path. Alara stood slowly. Then I wish you every joy, your grace. I will not interfere. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise perhaps at the lack of fight. But he said nothing more. He left, and she heard his footsteps moving toward the east wing, toward the rooms where Lady Cecily had been installed. That was the moment Alara Vance, Duchess of Ashford, stopped loving Alexander Ashford. Or rather, she told herself she did. The change began the next morning. Alara rose before dawn and dressed in a plain gray gown. She pinned her hair back simply and went downstairs to the kitchens. The cook, a stout woman named Mrs. Hardy, nearly dropped her rolling pin at the sight of the Duchess among the flour and copper pots. Your Grace, is something amiss? Nothing at all. I wish to help. Please show me what needs doing. Over the following weeks, Alara devoted herself to the estate with a quiet, relentless focus. She visited the tenant cottages, learning each family's struggles by name. She reorganized the stillroom, cataloged the library, and started a small school for the children of the servants and laborers. She listened more than she spoke, and her gentle, practical kindness slowly wove itself into the fabric of Ashford Park. The staff, who had initially pitied the neglected bride, began to admire her. She never complained. She never demanded attention. She simply did good day after day, and in doing so she began to heal. She stopped attending formal dinners. She took her meals in the village or in her sitting room. She stopped asking Alexander about his day. She stopped waiting up for him. When they passed each other in the corridors, she offered a polite nod and continued on her way. The silence between them grew vast and cold, but this time, she was the one who did not reach out to Bridget. Alexander noticed. At first he felt only a vague relief. Cecily required his attention. She was charming and vivacious, and she filled the halls with laughter. But as the weeks stretched on, he began to feel the absence of his wife in ways he could not articulate. The house seemed quieter. The staff's eyes no longer followed him with cautious hope. They looked at him with something closer to disappointment. And Alara herself, she had changed. She moved through the rooms with a serene, distant grace that was utterly unlike the tentative woman he had married. She no longer flinched when he was cold. She no longer tried. He found himself watching her. In the garden, she knelt among the herbs with the gardener's apprentice, her sleeves rolled up, her hair escaping its pins. She laughed at something the boy said, and the sound was so free, so light, that it stopped him in his tracks. He realized he had never heard her laugh like that. Then there was Mr. Thorne. Daniel Thorne was the estate steward, a man of 30 with kind brown eyes and a quiet competence that inspired trust. He had been with Ashford Park for 5 years, and he had never seen the Duchess as anything more than a distant figure until she began visiting the tenants. He accompanied her on her rounds, showing her the boundaries of the land, explaining the complexities of crop rotation and drainage. He was patient and respectful, and he did not look at her with pity. He looked at her as though she were simply a remarkable woman. Alexander came upon them one afternoon in the orchard. Alara was reaching for an apple on a high branch, and Daniel Thorne was steadying the ladder, his hand resting lightly on her elbow. She smiled down at him, a warm, natural smile, and said something that made him chuckle. Alexander felt a sharp, unfamiliar sensation twist in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. Jealousy, hot, irrational, and utterly unexpected. He strode forward, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves. Alara. She turned, and her smile faded into the polite mask she now wore exclusively for him. Your Grace, is something wrong? Your Grace, not Alexander, not even my lord, just Your Grace, as if he were a distant acquaintance. I need to speak with you, privately. His gaze cut to Thorne, who immediately stepped back and bowed. Of course, Your Grace. I shall see to the western fences. He gave Alara a brief, reassuring look before walking away. Alexander waited until he was gone. You spend a great deal of time with the steward. He is assisting me with the tenant outreach. It is part of my duty as Duchess. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a flicker of something guarded. It is unseemly for a Duchess to be so familiar with the staff. Alara tilted her head. I was unaware that kindness to those who work our lands was considered unseemly. I will keep your opinion in mind. She made to walk past him, but he caught her wrist. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily since the wedding. Her skin was warm, her pulse a steady flutter beneath his fingers. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face, and her expression was so utterly composed that it felt like a slap. Is there anything else? She asked. He let go, no. She walked away, and he stood alone in the orchard, the jealousy still burning in his chest, confused and angry and unable to name the true source of his turmoil. The discovery happened on a rain-drenched evening, 3 months after the ball. Alexander had been searching for a ledger in the library when a footman informed him that the Duchess had taken ill. A mild fever, the physician said, nothing dangerous, but she was resting in her chambers. Alexander felt a jolt of unease he could not explain. He told himself it was duty that propelled him up the stairs, duty that made him push open her door without knocking. Her sitting room was dim, lit only by the embers of the fire. A maid had left a tray of tea untouched. Alexander moved quietly toward the bedroom door, which stood ajar. He could see her lying in the bed, her hair spread across the pillow, her face pale but peaceful in sleep. On the bedside table, something caught the firelight. A small silver locket. He stepped closer, frowning. He picked it up and his heart stopped. The locket was old, its surface engraved with a delicate pattern of roses. He knew that pattern. He had traced it with his fingers 1,000 times as a boy. With trembling hands, he pressed the clasp and it sprang open. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman with dark hair and a cold, beautiful face. His mother. The world tilted violently. His breath seized in his lungs. This was the locket he had given to Ellie, the very locket. There was no mistaking it. His wife had it. His wife had had it all along. He did not remember moving. He only knew that suddenly he was beside the bed and she was stirring, her eyes fluttering open. They met his, and for a moment in her drowsy state there was no mask, only a deep, aching sadness. "Alexander," she murmured. He held up the locket. His voice was barely a whisper, rough with shock and something that felt terrifyingly like hope. "Where did you get this?" She went still. The haze of sleep cleared from her eyes, replaced by a weary resignation. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "You know where I got it." "Tell me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, and each word fell like a stone into still water. "I got it from a boy who promised to marry me. We met at Linden Hall when I was 12. He called me Ellie because I was too ashamed of my father's position to give him my real name. I gave him a blue ribbon from my hair. I wrote him letters for 2 years and he never answered. I thought he had forgotten me." Her voice cracked. "I was that girl, Alexander. I have been her all this time." He could not speak. The room seemed to spin around him. The locket glinted in his palm, undeniable proof. Every cold word he had spoken, every dismissive glance, every moment he had spent fawning over Cecily while his true love sat quietly in the shadows, invisible and heartbroken. It all crashed over him in a wave of suffocating guilt. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words were ragged, torn from somewhere deep inside him. "I tried. At the ball I came to you and you told me I knew nothing. You told me I had no right." A tear slipped down her cheek, but her voice remained steady. "You wanted so desperately for Cecily to be Ellie. You wanted her. I was standing right in front of you and you never once saw me." He sank to his knees beside the bed, the great Duke of Ashford, brought low by the weight of his own blindness. "Elara." "I loved you," she whispered. "From the moment I saw you again at the altar, I loved you, and you looked through me like I was nothing but a duty you were forced to endure." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. The rejection hit him like a physical blow. He stayed on his knees, unable to move, as she lay back down and turned her face away. "Please leave," she said quietly. "I am very tired." He left, but he did not sleep. He spent the night in the library, the locket clutched in his fist, staring into the dying fire as the truth burned through him. The next morning, he summoned Lady Cecily. She came into the drawing room with a bright smile, her blue gown rustling, her golden curls perfectly arranged. The smile faltered when she saw his expression. "Your Grace, you look quite severe this morning. How did you know about the locket?" Her face went blank. I beg your pardon." "The locket, I never mentioned it to anyone. The ribbon, the willow tree, the tarts, those could be learned. But the locket was my mother's portrait. Ellie and I were the only ones who knew of it. You never mentioned it. You didn't know about it, did you?" Cecily's composure cracked. Her eyes darted toward the door. I do not know what you mean. You are a liar. His voice was ice. You heard fragments of a story from a loose-tongued servant and you built a deception around it. You wore a false ribbon and played on my grief. You made a fool of me, and worse, you made a fool of my wife. Cecily's face crumpled into something ugly and desperate. She is nothing, a steward's daughter with no fortune and no connections. I gave you what you wanted. I became your Ellie. I made you happy. You made me blind. He stepped back, his disgust palpable. You will leave Ashford Park within the hour. If I ever see your face again, I will ruin you so thoroughly that even the lowest baron will not receive you. Do you understand? She fled, sobbing, but he felt no satisfaction. The real reckoning was still to come. He found his mother in her private parlor, embroidering by the window. She looked up with a serene smile that faded when she saw the locket in his hand. "Alexander, what is that?" "You know what it is." He laid it on the table between them. "You intercepted her letters. All those years I thought she had abandoned me. I hated her for it, but it was you. You destroyed her words and let me believe a lie." The Dowager Duchess's face turned ashen. Her needle clattered to the floor. "I did it for you, for this family. She was a steward's daughter. You were a duke. It would have been a scandal. I could not allow it. You could not allow me to choose my own happiness." His voice shook with a fury he had never before directed at her. "Do you know what I did to her? I married her, mother. She is my wife. And I have spent every day since our wedding making her feel unwanted, unloved, invisible, because you taught me that the girl I loved had thrown me away. You made me into a man who could not recognize his own heart." The dowager wept. He did not comfort her. He walked out of that room and went in search of his wife. Alara had left her chambers. He found her in the garden, sitting on the stone bench near the old fountain. She was dressed in a simple lavender gown, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Daniel Thorne was standing a respectful distance away, speaking with her in low tones. When Alexander approached, Thorne looked up with a cautious expression and bowed. "Your Grace." The Duchess was feeling well enough for some air. "I was just informing her about the roof repairs in the village." Alexander nodded stiffly. "Thank you, Thorne, you may go." The steward hesitated, glancing at Alara. She gave him a small, reassuring nod. Only then did he leave. Alexander sat beside her on the bench. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fountain trickled softly, and the scent of roses drifted on the breeze. "Cecily is gone," he said finally. "She confessed to everything, and my mother," his voice tightened. "My mother admitted to destroying your letters. I never received a single one. I thought you had forgotten me. I spent 10 years believing I was not worth remembering." Alara's hands were folded in her lap. Her profile was calm, but her eyes glistened. 10 years is a long time to believe a lie. "I know I have no excuse. I should have seen you. From the moment you walked into my life I should have felt the truth, but I was so trapped in my own bitterness that I refused to look." He turned to her, his gray eyes fierce with a desperation he had never allowed himself to show. "Alara, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I am asking anyway. I am begging you. I loved the memory of a girl I met under a willow tree, but I have come to love the woman you are now. Your strength, your quiet kindness, your unbreakable grace. I was a fool. I am still a fool, but I love you, not because you are Ellie, because you are you." She did not look at him. A tear traced a slow path down her cheek. "You only noticed me when you found the locket. You only loved me when you realized I was her." "That is not true," his voice broke. "I have been watching you for weeks. I have been jealous of Thorne, furious at your indifference, aching at your silence. I told myself it was possessiveness, wounded pride, but it was love. It has been growing in me since the day you first smiled at a tenant's child. I was too stubborn and too blind to name it, but it is love, Alara. It is the most terrifying and wonderful thing I have ever felt." She finally turned her head. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the coldness, the mask. She found none. In its place was a man stripped raw, his heart laid bare. "I am so tired of hurting," she whispered. "I do not know if I can trust this." "Then let me earn it." He took her hand, and this time she did not pull away. Her fingers were cold, and he wrapped both his hands around them, trying to warm them. "Let me spend every day proving it to you. I will not rush you. I will not demand. I will simply be here beside you for as long as it takes. I lost you once through cruelty and circumstance. I will not lose you again through my own cowardice." The fountain murmured, the roses swayed, and slowly, so slowly, her fingers curled around his. But the healing took time. There was no sudden, magical transformation. There were quiet mornings in the library where he read to her from the same poetry books they had shared as children. There were walks through the tenant village where he introduced her as "my Duchess" with a pride that made the farmers smile. There were long evenings by the fire where he spoke of his guilt and his grief, and she listened without judgment, her hand resting gently on his. He wrote her letters. Every day he left one on her pillow, recounting a memory from that golden summer, or describing a moment he had watched her from afar and felt his heart shift. She kept them all in a rosewood box beside her bed. One evening, 6 months after the locket's discovery, they stood together under the old willow tree at Linden Hall. He had brought her there at sunset, and the lake shimmered gold and rose. She wore the blue ribbon woven into her hair, and he wore the silver locket on a chain around his neck, the portrait of his mother replaced with a tiny sketch of Alara. "I made you a promise here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was a boy, and I meant it with a boy's heart, but I want to make it again, as a man who knows exactly what he is vowing." He took her hands and looked into her eyes. "I, Alexander Ashford, promise to see you. Every day, for the rest of my life, I will see you. I will love you as Alara, my wife, my partner, my dearest friend. I will never let you feel invisible again. I will spend the rest of my days earning the gift of your smile." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of release, of hope, of a heart finally allowed to heal. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw as if seeing him truly for the first time. "I have loved you for 10 years, she said. "I think I can manage a lifetime more." He kissed her then beneath the willow tree as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was not a kiss of desperate passion or frantic longing. It was a kiss of coming home, of quiet joy, of a promise kept. And in the years that followed, the people of Ashford Park often spoke of their Duke and Duchess, how they walked arm in arm through the gardens, how they laughed together at village fairs, how they rebuilt the orphanage and planted a new orchard with their own hands. They spoke of the way he looked at her, as though she were the most precious thing in his world. And they spoke of the way she looked at him, with a trust that had been hard-won and therefore all the more unbreakable. The blue ribbon, faded and fragile, hung in a glass case in their shared sitting room. Beside it rested the silver locket, open to show the little sketch inside. And every now and then, when the evening was quiet and the fire burned low, the Duke would take his wife's hand and say, "Thank you for waiting for me to find my way back." And the Duchess would smile and answer, "You were always worth waiting for."